So you've just finished building your website and now it's time to put it online. You start looking into hosting options and platforms like Vercel and Netlify seem like an easy choice. But should you really go with them? Well, let's talk about the downsides. You've probably heard the horror stories, unexpectedly massive bills that catch developers off guard. These platforms make it super easy to deploy websites and apps, but the moment your project gets some traction, costs can spiral out of control. So what's the alternative? That's where self-hosting comes in. By running your own server, you get full control over your costs and performance. And thanks to tools like Coolify, setting up and managing your own infrastructure is easier than ever. By the end of this video, you will have a fully self-hosted setup, giving you complete control over your infrastructure with predictable costs. So let's get started. The first thing you need is a server. In most cases, a VPS or virtual private server will be more than enough. There are plenty of hosting providers out there. In this video I'm going to use Hetzner, but you can also follow along with a server from a different provider. To create a Hetzner account, head over to hetzner.com and click on Login, Cloud and select Register New. After the registration process, you should now see this page. If this is not the case, navigate to hetzner.com and select Login, Cloud again. You can now create a project for your server. I'm gonna name mine Tutorial. After the project has been created, click on Create Server. First you have to decide on a location for your cloud instance. Make sure to pick the closest to your users. You can keep the OS image as its default, Ubuntu 24.04, which has established itself as a good choice for servers. Now the most important part, the selection of the type and size of your instance. I recommend to use one of the ARM servers, which are usually the best price to performance ones. You now have the choice between different specs. If you're just starting out, I recommend to start with the smallest CAX11 with 2 vCores, 4GB of RAM and 40GB of storage. Should you need more resources later on, you can always upgrade your server on Hetzner, as long as you don't scale up the storage during the upgrade. I'm gonna leave all the other settings at the defaults for now. After you click buy, you will have to wait a few seconds and then your server should be up and running. To control your server, we're gonna use SSH. You should have received the needed credentials via email. To SSH into your server, open your terminal or PowerShell if you're on Windows and run SSH root add and then the IP address of your server. If you get this fingerprint warning, just type yes and press enter. Next you will get prompted to change the root password. Make sure to pick a secure one, as this is currently the only thing an attacker or bot needs to get access to your server. Using the root user for everything is risky and therefore not recommended, because if an attacker gets access to the account, they have full control over your server. A sudo user limits damage by requiring authentication for critical actions, reducing the impact of exploits. To create a new user, run @user followed by the username of the new user. I'll go with server. Set a password and enter a full name for your user. You can leave the rest empty. As you can see, this command also creates a home directory for the new user. Now let's allow the user to run privileged commands by using sudo, by adding him to the sudo group with the command usermod -ag sudo and your username. Let's now switch to key-based authentication, which is much safer than using a password. To create a new key pair, run ssh-keygen and choose a path for your key. If you want to, you can also set a passphrase for your key. To let the server accept our public key, we need to copy it to our server. We can do this with the ssh-copy-id command, which also needs the path we chose for our key and the username we just set, as well as the address for our server. Doing this for the sudo user is enough, but I'm gonna upload my key to the root user as well. Now we need to configure our local SSH to use the generated key automatically by updating our .sh/config file with this content. Make sure to replace the IP address with the one of your cloud instance. Let's connect to a server as previously, but make sure to pick the new user instead of root. For security reasons, we want to disable password-based authentication. To do this, edit /etc/ssh/sshd_config. Use Ctrl+W to find password authentication, then uncomment the line and set the value to no. We then want to disable root authentication by setting permit root login to no. Save the file by pressing Ctrl+O followed by return and then close nano with Ctrl+X. To apply our changes, run sudo systemctl restart ssh. To check if our configuration works, disconnect from the server by pressing Ctrl+D or by running exit and try to connect as a normal user to the server. You should now only be prompted to enter a passphrase or get directly logged in if you haven't set one. Also make sure to check that you can no longer connect as root. We can now add a firewall to the server. I'm gonna do this via the Hetzner Cloud website, but this can also be done with programs like UFW. Open your Cloud panel, select your server and then under the Firewall tab, click Enable Firewall. We want to allow inbound traffic to the ports 22 for SSH and 8000, 6001, 6002, 443 and 80 for Coolify. Now that we have good security practices in place, we can start to really work on the server. Let's start with updating the system by running sudo apt update followed by sudo apt upgrade. As already mentioned, I will go with Coolify to manage all the services on the server. To install Coolify, head over to coolify.io and copy the installation command. Paste it in the server console and add sudo before bash to run the script with superuser. Paste it in the server console and add sudo before bash to run the script with sudo user permissions. After a couple of minutes, you will receive a URL based on the IP address of your server, which you can use to access Coolify. The first thing you need to do there is to create your user account. Make sure to select localhost as the location for the resources, which means that this server will run both Coolify itself and also the managed services. If you applied the same SSH settings as I did, you will receive this exact error message, because Coolify can't authenticate to the server. To fix this, we have to update our /etc/ssh/sshd_config to allow root login via a public key by setting permit root login to prohibit password. To apply the changes, once again run sudo systemctl restart ssh. Clicking on check again in Coolify should now close this error. Now it's time to connect a domain to our server. I have a spare domain on Porkbun that I can use, but you can just buy them pretty cheap on different platforms. Let's copy the IP address from our server and then we're gonna add two A records. One with an empty host and one with the host set to an asterisk, which serves as a wildcard for all subdomains. Use the copied address as the value. We can now tell Coolify on which domain our dashboard should be, under Settings and Instance Domain. I'm gonna use https://coolify. And then my domain. You may need to wait a couple of hours, but then you should be able to access your dashboard on a specified domain. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to install Umami, a free and open source Google Analytics alternative. To do this, select your project and click on Add New Resource. You can now search for Umami. After this, you can specify the domain dedicated to the service. Finally, click on Deploy and wait until all services have been started. If you get this security warning when trying to access Umami, just wait a couple of minutes while Coolify creates the needed SSL certificates. You can now access Umami with the default username admin and the password umami. That's it, you can now easily self-host your services and websites using Coolify.